The Mars family is often associated with candy, but the real story is about building one of the most durable private companies in the world. Over more than a century, Mars Incorporated grew through disciplined operations, constant reinvestment, tight family control, and a long-term approach that allowed the company to survive wars, recessions, generational transitions, and major shifts in consumer culture. The story begins with Frank C. Mars. Frank was born in Minnesota in 1883 and learned to hand-dip chocolate from his mother. In 1911, he began making candy from his kitchen in Tacoma, Washington. By 1920, he had moved to Minneapolis and launched a small candy business called the Nougat House. At the time, Frank was operating just one of many candy companies in America. But Frank, and later his son Forrest, understood something that their many competitors did not. Consumers don't simply buy candy. They buy feelings like comfort, familiarity, indulgence, and consistency. That insight shaped the company's first major breakthrough, the Milky Way bar, a fluffy malt-flavored nougat covered in chocolate. According to Mars history, the Milky Way came from a conversation between Frank and Forrest Mars about turning the flavor of the popular malted milkshake into a candy bar. Rather than inventing a completely unfamiliar product, Mars translated an experience that consumers already loved into something pourable, affordable, and mass-producible. That became one of the defining Mars strategies: take something emotionally familiar and industrialize it. But the brilliance of Milky Way was not just in marketing. The nougat center made the bar feel large and satisfying while remaining relatively efficient to manufacture. Mars was already thinking simultaneously about psychology, manufacturing, and scale. The company followed the Milky Way with Snickers in 1930 and Three Musketeers in 1932, rapidly building a portfolio of recognizable brands rather than relying on a single hit product or creating generic chocolate products. Mars also marketed differently from many competitors. During the Great Depression, candy bars became inexpensive emotional rewards that consumers could still justify even during hardship. Mars products became emotionally reliable consumer staples at moments when many families could not afford larger luxuries. At the same time, Mars was building industrial scale. In 1929, the company relocated to Chicago, giving it stronger rail access, centralized logistics, and infrastructure capable of supporting national distribution. However, the most important force shaping the company was the relationship between Frank Mars and his son Forrest Mars. Frank was the founder and product craftsman who built the early business around candy innovations and consumer appeal. Forrest thought differently. He was more systems-oriented, more operationally disciplined, and more focused on industrial scale. After studying industrial engineering at Yale University, Forrest developed an ambitious operator mindset that clashed with his father's. The relationship between Frank and Forrest was deeply strained. Forrest wanted a larger role in the company and believed that Mars could become a far larger global enterprise. Tensions over control, ownership, and the future direction of the business eventually pushed Forrest out of the American operations. In 1932, Forrest moved to Europe, where he independently built Mars United Kingdom operations while developing his own manufacturing systems, management philosophy, and operational culture separate from his father's American business. What began as a family conflict ultimately became one of the company's greatest strengths. In many family businesses, generational tension weakens the organization. At Mars, the split forced the next generation to build its own systems, discipline, products, and identity, ultimately making the company stronger. Forrest's company reflected Forrest's philosophies far more than the original operation his father had built. Over time, many of Forrest's ideas became formalized into Mars' 5 principles: quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom. And Forrest enforced those principles aggressively. He believed operational discipline created strategic advantage. Mars tightly controlled manufacturing, protected recipes and production systems, reinvested heavily into infrastructure, and maintained unusually high internal standards. The principles also shaped Mars' long-term freedom to pursue new ventures and diversify into entirely new industries. Even cleanliness became part of the culture. Forrest Mars reportedly walked factory floors, obsessing over spotless machinery and operational perfection. At Mars, quality was not treated as a branding slogan. It was enforced operationally, physically, and culturally. That discipline became one of the invisible drivers behind the family's long-term success. Many family businesses decline as operational rigor weakens across generations. Forrest Mars institutionalized his standards deeply enough that the company continued operating with deep discipline across generations. It's important to note that after Frank Mars died in 1934, he and Forrest were still running two separate operations. The Mars empire was still technically divided for 30 years past Frank's death, until the two companies were officially merged in 1964 to become a unified Mars incorporated with Forrest as the president and chief executive officer. In addition to great family tensions, the Mars family also survived some of the most disruptive periods of the 20th century, including the Great Depression and World War II. During World War II, Mars adapted quickly to military demand. In 1941, the company began producing M&Ms for the United States military because the candy shell prevented the chocolate from melting easily in the field. The product became so important during wartime that the government reportedly wanted broader access to Mars candy-making methods and formulations in order to rapidly expand military candy production through other manufacturers. Forrest Mars resisted broad sharing of core recipes and production methods, reflecting one of the family's defining instincts: protect the intellectual property and manufacturing systems behind the business. That instinct became deeply embedded in the Mars culture. The family viewed recipes, operational methods, manufacturing knowledge, and even brand names as strategic assets that needed to remain tightly controlled and protected. Even branding reinforced this philosophy. The famous M, printed on M&M candies, appeared in 1950 to distinguish authentic Mars products from imitators. At the same time, wartime demand dramatically expanded Mars' manufacturing capacity and operational sophistication. Then came another remarkable cultural moment. In 1981, M&Ms became the first candy carried into space when astronauts aboard the first space shuttle mission selected the product as part of their food supply. This mattered for more than publicity. It reinforced a pattern that had existed since World War II. Mars products succeeded when they performed reliably in extreme environments. The military trusted M&Ms. Astronauts trusted M&Ms. And consumers internalized those signals. Mars repeatedly benefited from moments where functionality reinforced branding and created powerful marketing opportunities. But long before M&Ms, Forrest Mars was already thinking beyond confectionery. In 1935, he acquired Chappell Brothers Limited, the maker of Chappy canned dog food in the United Kingdom. At first glance, dog food seemed unrelated to candy. However, strategically, the deal made enormous sense. Pet food shared many of the same characteristics that made confectionery attractive: repeat purchases, emotional attachment, strong branding potential, and consistent household demand. Forrest recognized something very early. If a company earns trust inside the home, it can expand far beyond its original category and establish a recurring cycle of household spending. Over time, Mars expanded pet care through brands like Whiskas and Pedigree. Eventually, the company realized something even more valuable. If consumers trusted Mars to feed their pets, perhaps they would also trust Mars with pet health itself. That insight eventually transformed Mars from a confectionery company into one of the largest animal health organizations in the world. Mars first invested in Banfield Pet Hospital during the 1990s and became sole owner in 2007. Mars later acquired Blue Pearl and then VCA, one of the largest veterinary hospital operators in North America. Owning hospitals like Banfield and Blue Pearl gave Mars access to massive amounts of clinical data. This real-world evidence helps improve Mars pet food formulas and develop preventive health screenings through their diagnostics brands like Antec. The company also expanded heavily into gum and food. One of the most important acquisitions in Mars history came in 2008, when Mars acquired Wrigley in a deal valued at approximately $23 billion. People buy gum repeatedly throughout the day, often with very little deliberation. By acquiring Wrigley, Mars strengthened its position in convenience retail and habitual low-cost consumer purchases. Mars applied similar logic when expanding into other food products like Ben's Original, Pringles, Eggo, and Cheez-Its. In 2017, the company founded Mars Edge, which is the human-centric counterpart to Mars's massive veterinary and animal health infrastructure. Within the larger Mars ecosystem, it serves as a human health research hub for human wellness across bioactives, personalized wellness, and nutrition. The research at Mars Edge can be seen in Mars brands like Coco Via and Gomo. Again, Mars was repositioning itself ahead of cultural change. Mars recognized a shift toward proactive wellness and was early in recognizing the growing demand surrounding the longevity movement. Mars recognized that health was becoming a core part of the consumer's personal identity. For a company that built its empire on sugar, Mars was able to shield itself from the shifting tides of public health sentiment with Mars Edge. And because the company remained private, it could do risky long-term expansions in areas like veterinary care and Mars Edge this without facing pressure for short-term quarterly performance. That private ownership structure became one of the foundations of the family's generational wealth. Reuters reported that Mars deliberately resisted public listing, allowing the family to maintain long-term strategic control and reinvest heavily back into the company. IMD later reported that Mars reinvests over 90% of annual profits. So while many public competitors focused on quarterly reporting cycles and investor expectations, Mars could quietly build long-duration businesses without drawing attention. That mattered especially in veterinary care and pet health. By the time many competitors fully recognized how large the animal health ecosystem was becoming, Mars had already built dominant positions across clinics, diagnostics, pet nutrition, and veterinary infrastructure. Reinvestment has helped the Mars family sustain 5 generations of family success, involvement, and ownership in Mars Inc. This is significant because statistically, about 90% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the end of the 3rd generation. Despite being one of the richest businessmen in the world, Forrest led a frugal lifestyle and raised his children in the same manner. He avoided publicity, photographs, and interviews. The family continues to value modesty and privacy. By Forrest's death in 1999, his 3 children, Forrest Jr., John, and Jacqueline, were already deeply involved in Mars and had helped expand, govern, and preserve the increasingly global business while maintaining the company's operational culture and long-term orientation as the 3rd generation. By the 4th and 5th generations, the family increasingly separated ownership from executive management without giving up control or influence. The company has had non-family CEOs since 2001, but Mars family members have continued to hold major board and chairman roles. This structure allowed the family to remain active long-term stewards of the company, while professional executives managed day-to-day operations. Today, Mars is no longer simply a candy company. It is a privately controlled global empire spanning confectionery, pet care, veterinary infrastructure, food, and health research. The Mars family did not build its fortune through a single invention or lucky product cycle. It built systems, culture, operational discipline, and long-term control that compounded across generations. In a business world dominated by short-term thinking, the Mars story demonstrates how private ownership, reinvestment, and institutional continuity can quietly build one of the most durable family enterprises in modern history.